Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Rangers review morning briefing. As you can see, it's just me you're left with. Unfortunately, this morning we've had, hence the slightly later start time. Johnny's had to go and attend to something, so we thought we'll do the briefing later in the day, probably when I'm at Anfield, where we'll both be on. But I thought that I'd just come on firstly to I guess speak about some questions before today's big game, round up some of the big news from yesterday's press conference. Obviously, the briefing that we had yesterday was, I think, in between the Liverpool manager and the Rangers manager's press conference, and go through that. Obviously, such a big game tonight in the Champions League match day 3 of the group stage. Rangers really need to get something out of this double header with Liverpool if they have any hope of really playing not only Champions League football, which I think is a big ask, with them having lost their first 2 games, but European football after Christmas. But they come into the game in a slightly better moment than they've approached games against Napoli and Ajax. You can feel that. I think even myself being at this game compared to, for example, Ajax, there's a much better atmosphere just because it's off the back of a couple of wins. And Liverpool also are maybe in a little bit of a sticky moment. Obviously, they're also still, one of the 2-3 best teams when they put it all together. But this season they haven't done that quite consistently. They've conceded a number of similar goals, and if you want to read that, if you in the description, you can there's a link to not only subscribe and support the website, as you can see at the bottom, but also read our analysis piece on what Jurgen Klopp spoke about yesterday, which I'll get into in a minute. But obviously the big news, which is what we'll start with before getting into the questions, is Tom Lawrence at the end of Giovanni Van Bronckhorst's press conference yesterday. I'll read you the quotes. He was asked, is Tom Lawrence okay? Is he included in the injury update that Van Bronckhorst gave earlier on in the press conference? He said, and Van Bronckhorst said, Tom Lawrence's recovery went on schedule, but he sustained a new injury, unfortunately, this week. We have to wait and see how long he'll be out. And then when he was asked further, he thinks it'll be longer term, probably more months than weeks. So that, certainly is going to be after the World Cup. They don't know the nature of the injury. He says, we are still diagnosing it, but I don't think we will have him back before the World Cup. And it happened in training. So, everyone thought that, and Tom Lawrence's first recovery for his first injury was on schedule. Van Bronckhorst didn't elaborate on what the second injury sustained in training was, but obviously that's such a big blow, because it was a blow to not have Tom Lawrence the weekend against Hearts. He's quickly become quite an integral player to this Rangers team, particularly with the injuries that they have in the attack midfield area, the fact that Malik Tillman is still a young player and has been out the firing line for the last couple of weeks. Tom Lawrence was expected to come back initially after the international break, so that's a really big blow. James Tavernier, when he came in and spoke to the media minutes after, kind of reaffirmed that, speaking about what Lawrence has already brought to Rangers and why that would be potentially so damaging. Rangers obviously have a number of players to come back in that position, but if you look at the number of games that they have over the next month until the World Cup starts, I can't remember how many it is off the top of my head, but it is a lot of football. So I think you need Malik Tillman to really rekindle the form that he showed at the start of his Rangers career, for one, and then hopefully, as I say, after the World Cup, you have a number of players back in that position. But it's certainly a bit of a not an ideal situation whatsoever, with Tom Lawrence ruled out till after the World Cup. Aside from that, there was nothing too major from Van Bronckhorst's press conference. He spoke about the goalkeeping position. He said he doesn't like to talk about number 1 and number 2, even though he said, prior to the game at the weekend and obviously yesterday, that Alan will continue in goals. He said, I had to inform both players, which I did last week, speaking about Alan McGregor and John McLaughlin. We all have one thing in mind, which is to be successful for this club. The decision is for me to make and not the players to accept. So I thought that was quite an interesting little addition from Van Bronckhorst to say, if you're John McLaughlin in this situation, you can well imagine you'd be frustrated at it, whether or not people, whether you think McGregor should be in goals, McLaughlin should be in goals, or Rangers should have signed another goalkeeper in the summer. But Van Bronckhorst has made what is, in my opinion, a reasonably big decision because McLaughlin, let's not pretend, he was his number 1 going into the season, even if Van Bronckhorst didn't put a label on it. I think he obviously in hindsight wasn't putting a label on it because he maybe didn't have full faith in him. I think that's justified by the fact that we're in early October and McGregor's back in goals. So that was, I guess, another interesting point. We'll touch quickly on Jurgen Klopp's press conference before we get into some of the comments. Klopp was really interesting, and the main thing that he spoke about, and there's a piece on the website that details this and goes into greater detail in this. At the top of the website today, as I say, you can see it in the comments or the link in the description. Klopp was speaking about Liverpool's special problem, and what he's meaning is the type of repetitive goals they've conceded. So Liverpool obviously are a team, it says in the piece, that they're known for their intensity. Intensity is, very much part of their identity, and the way they press teams is, I think, the cornerstone of how Jurgen Klopp wants to play football. But in recent weeks, if you look at the Brighton game, if you look at what are the games, the Ajax game, if you look at the Napoli game, there is similarities and themes of a constant kind of threads going through the type of goal that Liverpool have been conceding. So this piece dives in a little bit deeper to that. I'll read you Klopp's comments because they're quite interesting. He says, "You're right, we have conceded now similar goals like this where they go through the same gaps. The special problem that we have is that we have a very brave way of defending usually. And when the timing in our defending is not perfect, we can leave a gap open. That has always been the case, by the way, but the pressure has normally remained. So the ball, so no one has really recognised when to play the ball. We normally close it with intensity." He goes on to say, "If you don't do this, the gap is open for a short moment and Brighton can use it quite often. We have to be more compact." So it's a really interesting, I guess, theme. Sitting there yesterday, I was very interested listening to Klopp speak about it. And what he's effectively saying is, if Liverpool go and press and be aggressive, but they don't have that cohesion, they're not compact, they're not aggressive enough, then it can just leave space in behind. If Liverpool don't have pressure on the ball and they play such a high line, maybe similar to Rangers last season at points under Steven Gerrard before he left, then it's easy to play the ball in behind and opposition runners to kind of gain momentum and get in behind. So this Liverpool team aren't without the weaknesses. Obviously, the caveat of that is that they could turn up and easily absolutely blow Rangers away today. You look at the capability of their great rivals over the last few years, Man City, and the number of goals they've got on that team. Liverpool obviously can boast something similar. But Rangers, I think, will feel that there is areas they can exploit. And Van Bronckhorst said that. I asked him, is there areas when you've looked at Liverpool that you feel comfortable and kind of confident that your team can exploit? And he said, there are always things to exploit. Any team has those areas that you can exploit. So again, that's true. It's a bit cliche. It's true for every team, but it's not as if this Liverpool team are in their best moment. Again, they could recover that best moment tonight. But speaking at time of recording, I think there is reason to feel like Rangers can be competitive tonight, and hopefully with their kind of return to somewhat of form with a win against Hearts. I know it's one game, and you don't count a home win against Dundee United for me off the back of the results before that. There certainly seems to be a little bit more confidence. Right, let's get through some of the comments because I know things like Antonio Cholak and Alfredo Morelos are going to be a talking point, pardon me. Lots of good mornings. Pete says, what a game to look forward to. Alistair says, good morning. John says, good morning. Pete says, a great test too. Mark, morning. Lots of mornings here. Let me get through to something that is a talking point. Right, 3-5-2 tonight. I think you're right, Sonny Boy. That it's kind of the shape that Van Bronckhorst played against Napoli. Kent sometimes in possession will pull wide, and if Rangers have the ball, have periods of possession, at other points he'll sit high with Morelos in transition. I think it's important that Rangers are able to get two up at the top of points. I think Morelos has to start. The argument against that is Cholak, if he gets one shot tonight, he could score. The argument against that is you might not get a shot because you have to, create those shots at this level of football. It's much harder to generate chances. Morelos hasn't played that much recently, but if you had a perfect game that you can imagine from, I think, not perfect game, but if you imagine a type of player you want in a game like this for Rangers, someone who can get you up the park, be combative. And you've seen that against Napoli. Even when the ball was going up to Morelos, sometimes he wasn't always winning the ball. He was always putting his marker off. He was always getting ahead on it, disrupting it, even when, as I say, he wasn't necessarily taking and spinning on the ball and playing it in. So for me, it would be Morelos, but do let me know what you think in the comments. Casey says, no European football after Christmas wouldn't be the worst thing. First time in a long time to concentrate on purely winning the league. That's true, Casey, but it'd be interesting to know what the kind of team and management think of that. I guess that, again, the cliche response would probably be that they would want to be in as many competitions as possible. But it's a real possibility at the moment. Obviously, going up against Liverpool twice, in a way, it's quite unique because their Rangers could go and put in a good performance tonight and lose, and there wouldn't be, I think, that much anger. And that's quite, I think, unique at a club like Rangers. But Liverpool are of this level. As I say, they're one of the best teams in the world. They've played in 3 of the last 5 Champions League finals, which, when you put it like that, you think, wow, that's quite a high level. But they do equally, Rangers do need to go and get something, as I say, if they want to play any form of European football after Christmas. And as well as that, Rangers have them at home next week. It's a quick turnaround. I think it's next Wednesday. So it's going to be, I think, a very, very difficult couple of games. Rangers will hopefully have looked at Brighton and taken some form of encouragement, seen how they kind of played through the press, as we've just discussed. But yeah, to go away to Anfield and take anything is going to be really difficult. Be interesting to see how the manager sets up, how aggressive he goes. As I say, I think probably 3 at the back or 5 at the back is a common consensus and probably the best outcome, because, simply put, you probably want as many defenders on the pitch as you can when you're playing against this type of team. And also, one of Rangers' most potent weapons in Europe is Tavernier at the back post. Think of how many times that happened on not only the road to Seville last season, but we've seen that as an attacking threat in the qualifiers so far. I think it was Tavernier at the back post in the lead up to the second goal against Union. That only happens if he's able to do that, if he's got that cover, either by playing a couple of defensive-minded midfielders who can fill in for a more kind of tweaking that shape. So it's a 3 at the back. Brian says full team, need to step up their game tonight. Yes, it's one of these games where I don't think you can have anyone that's really off it. And the positive thing for Rangers is that at the weekend, you look at players like Kent, hopefully coming back into a bit of form. And if anyone can remind me the last time that Kent scored and assisted in a domestic game, I think it'll be a wee while ago. He's coming back to a place where he came through, obviously, tonight, and that's quite a nice kind of underlying narrative. I'm sure he'll have a bit of a point to prove. He obviously worked under Klopp. I'm sure he'll want to go and put on a good account of himself. But Rangers will need everyone. Lundstrom will need him to have a great game. Goals, and Ben Davies, because you expect him to play as well, because I don't think it's going to be a back 2 of Goldson and King. But yeah, we shall see later on. Let's get through a couple more comments. I'm also going to be at the youth team game tonight. This afternoon. I think it's at 1 o'clock. So a few things to do before that, but do keep up on my Twitter, on the YouTube channel. Have your notifications on. I imagine what I'll do is I'll be speaking to the manager and a player after the game. I think I'm going to leave it there just now because I've got to trek along to the training ground. But yeah, big game tonight. Obviously, huge, appealing tie. Hope you enjoy it wherever you're watching it. Safe trip if you're coming down to Anfield. Myself and Johnny will be live just before the game. As I say, I'll be at the youth team game in the next couple of hours. So do follow us on Twitter and keep your notifications on YouTube. Thank you very much for joining me until then, and I will speak